Disney's $200 million live-action Mulan is facing global backlash. Its star publicly supported Hong Kong police during pro-democracy protests, and its producer thanked the Public Security Bureau of Xinjiang region, where millions of Uyghurs are being held in camps. The Chinese regime held a ceremony to honor its medical staff for fighting the pandemic. But Chinese netizens noticed one person's name was missing from the awards list. A Chinese military scientist claims her vaccine can handle all virus mutations, but one expert is casting doubt. In Google Maps Street View, some pro-democracy graffiti in Hong Kong is found to be blurred. And Beijing said Hong Kong never had separation of powers. Its autonomy was granted by Beijing. And amid tense relations between Australia and China, 2 Australian correspondents were rushed out of China Monday night. One of them said it's a relief to be back in a country with genuine rule of law. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Walt Disney's new live-action adaptation of Mulan has become the subject of global backlash. That's over its star's support of Hong Kong police and for being partly filmed in the country's Xinjiang region. The area is home to the Uyghur Muslim ethnic group, currently subject to human rights abuses. Hong Kong activist Joshua Wong has encouraged a global boycott.
Now it's time for people to, through the boycott action, to let Disney to know that kowtow to China should not be the way out. And for celebrities or any actors that endorse the police brutality, the world will give response and backfire to it.
The live-action remake of Mulan on Disney's streaming platform and in cinemas has been launched this month. It triggered the use of hashtags Boycott Mulan and Ban Mulan on Twitter, promoted by activists not only in Hong Kong, but also in Taiwan and Thailand. The hashtags first emerged last year after Mulan star Chinese actress Liu Yifei expressed support on social media for the police in Hong Kong, which were suppressing Hong Kong's pro-democratic movements with brutality. But the movie's links to the western region of Xinjiang, where China's clampdown on ethnic Uyghurs has drawn widespread condemnation and has also come in for criticism. Since 2016, millions of Uyghurs have been detained in at least 500 prison camps across Xinjiang, also called re-education centers by Beijing. Several state-run organizations in Xinjiang appeared in the film's credits. One of those is the Chinese Communist Party's Propaganda Commission, the same organization that produced disinformation in attempts to justify and validate the detention camps. Another is a local branch of the Xinjiang Public Security Bureau, which has been deeply involved in the Xinjiang concentration camps, and in July became subject to U.S. government sanctions as a result to that involvement. Some local residents in Hong Kong said they had been following the controversy and supported the boycott.
The character Liu played is that of a righteous person, but she said she supports police brutality. The police brutality in Hong Kong, what the police have done, is completely without justice. So she is so different from the actual Mulan. She is the opposite of Mulan.
Liu expressed support for the police during pro-democracy protests, saying on a social media account last year, "I support the Hong Kong police. You can all hit me. What a shame for Hong Kong." China's foreign ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian repeated Beijing's denial of the existence of re-education camps in Xinjiang, calling facilities there vocational and educational institutions, and accusing anti-China forces of smearing its Xinjiang policy. The movie reportedly cost $200 million to produce and was scheduled to reach theaters in March, but its release was delayed by the CCP virus pandemic. Last month, Disney said Mulan would skip most theaters and go directly to its Disney Plus platform. The movie is set to release in China this Friday and in Hong Kong next week.
Now we turn to Hong Kong. Google Maps Street View has blurred some pro-democracy graffiti in Hong Kong. That's according to local news outlet Hong Kong Free Press. The report said Google Maps blurred 2 areas of graffiti. One of them included the message, "Xi Jinping must die for the sake of the world," while another said, "Liberate Hong Kong, the revolution of our time." Another slogan, "Fight for freedom," was also blurred. Though the slogans are visible if seen from a distance, In an emailed response, Google told Hong Kong Free Press that their automatic blurring technology aims to blur faces and license plates so they can't be identified. But it looks like we didn't get it right in this instance. And as for Hong Kong-China relations, the Chinese regime said on Monday that separation of powers never existed in Hong Kong and that the city's autonomy was granted by Beijing. The move is in support of Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam, who has made similar remarks in line with Beijing's view. Lam's view stands in contrast to Hong Kong's legal community. The Hong Kong Bar Association issued a statement saying it's concerned with Lam's comments and that the city's mini-constitution has defined the separation of powers clearly. Lam's remarks also drew backlash from pro-democracy activists. They say it proves Beijing is tightening its grip on the city. This August, Hong Kong authorities asked publishers to remove references to the separation of powers from textbooks. Later, Hong Kong's education chief said the separation of powers never existed in Hong Kong, and that's why it should be removed from the textbooks. The U.S. will move to block imports of cotton and tomato products from China's Xinjiang region over allegations they are produced with forced labor. The actions hit two of China's major commodity exports. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is expected to announce 5 other import bans of products related to Xinjiang forced labor. U.S. law requires the agency to detain shipments when there is an allegation of forced labor. The Trump administration is increasing pressure on the Chinese regime over its treatment of Xinjiang's Uyghur ethnic minorities. The United Nations says it has credible reports that 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in camps. The Chinese Communist regime says the camps are vocational training centers. China will impose sanctions on senior U.S. officials who visit Taiwan and American companies that they have ties with. This, according to the editor-in-chief of the Global Times on Tuesday. Hu Xijing said on his official Twitter account that those being sanctioned would never be allowed to enter mainland China and that any U.S. companies they have ties with would lose access to the Chinese mainland market. The Global Times is published by the People's Daily, the official newspaper of China's ruling Communist Party. In August, China sanctioned 11 Americans over U.S. moves against the new security law China imposed on Hong Kong. These 11 included several U.S. senators, such as Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. Most of them had been targeted by Beijing before. China's foreign ministry didn't offer details about the sanctions. This move was considered largely to be symbolic. The Chinese regime held a ceremony to honor its medical staff for fighting the pandemic. But Chinese netizens noticed one person's name was missing from the awards list. That's as a Chinese military scientist claims her vaccine can handle all virus mutations. But one expert is casting doubt.
The Chinese regime held a ceremony on Tuesday honoring medical experts who contributed to controlling the virus. Communist leader Xi Jinping claimed the virus control proved what he called the incomparably strong leadership of the Communist Party. But Chinese netizens noticed one name is missing among the honored. That's Dr. Li Wenliang, the whistleblower from Wuhan, who tried to alert the public to the infectious virus as early as December. He was summoned by Chinese police for what they deemed spreading rumors online and later died from the virus. Li's Weibo account has since become China's virtual wailing wall or memorial wall with over 1 million comments. One comment questioned, "Why isn't there a badge of honor for him?" Some said, "In my heart, I don't care about those being honored. Those people can never compare to you." Another wrote, "I'm so sad. That badge doesn't deserve you. You will always live in our hearts." Yet another commented, "The police letter of reprimand is a real badge of honor." There are also some who questioned the lack of authorities' reflection. One of them wrote, "Who arrested Li Wenliang and forced him to sign a letter of reprimand? Who prohibited the news from being published? When they honor people, I think we also need a ceremony for reflection. Every time there's a major disaster, we always hold a ceremony of honor, but never reflection. Aren't there man-made factors in this disaster?" One person who was honored by Xi is Chinese military scientist Chen Wei. The People's Liberation Army general has told state media that the vaccine she's developing can fight all mutations of the virus. She also claimed her team can quickly produce vaccines to cope with the virus's future mutations, calling it as easy as developing software patches and updates. But some think the statement is too far-fetched.
So it probably can work most of the time for different mutations, but you cannot guarantee that it will work for all mutations. So I think that's definitely an exaggerated statement.
Former biologist with the U.S. Army Sean Lin said even for the influenza vaccines, every year the CDC has to screen so many different strains to choose an ideal seed strain for the next season's vaccine.
The process of selecting a seed strain is quite challenging, and also the vaccine company need to remake all these vaccine products. So it's not simple like a software upgrade.
Let alone for the CCP virus, a new and quickly mutating virus that scientists still don't fully understand. Lin said China has lost global standing amid the pandemic. That's due to its cover-up of the virus and later its reported buying up and hoarding of donated masks and medical gear, which were later sold for profit. Now, he suggests the regime may again try to win back its international reputation, this time with vaccines.
And China is also very aggressive, trying to make it a political advantage to have a vaccine first. So they have tried to skip many other steps and accelerate the process in the vaccine research, vaccine production.
Besides, China has a history of producing faulty vaccines.
Because the large scales of vaccine productions really demands very high technology in the purities of these vaccine products. Many of the adjuvants, many of these stabilizing agents that can cause also additional side effects. So that's why large-scale vaccine production is a huge challenge for China. The whole world need to be very cautious. Whoever produced the vaccine first does not mean who produced the best vaccine.
He suggested people wait for more vaccine companies' results from different phase 3 clinical trials, then evaluate and cross-compare the different products. The Chinese military general said her team is preparing for mass vaccination at a low price as soon as phase 3 clinical trial results are released. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Nearly 200,000 Chinese social media accounts have been closed in August. It's part of the regime's internet censorship of what it calls negative information. Chinese Communist Party's or CCP Cyberspace Administration recently held a meeting. It was reportedly held to, according to the regime, bring order into the internet. Among the campaign's targets are commercial network platforms, self-made media, social media, and live webcasts. In practice, that means any user deemed problematic will be suspended from producing content or have their accounts completely shut down. So far, about 6 million accounts have been investigated. Around 180,000 live broadcast platforms and news anchor accounts were closed, all within a month. A person attending the Cyberspace Administration meeting anonymously revealed that it will soon be even more difficult for China's self-made media to survive. That's because, according to regulations, outlets will now be prohibited from reprinting news that was already officially published by state media. Likewise, reporting on negative incidents is also not allowed. Put simply, independent media outlets won't be able to report on anything that could tarnish the CCP's reputation. Zhou Shuguang, a former Chinese citizen reporter and network engineer, says the CCP's goal is to suppress those with public influence.
Because every influential person can unite a group of people, the CCP takes it as a potential threat to the Communist Party that implements a one-party dictatorship. That is why it carries out such suppression.
Reporting by Chen Han, Li Yun, NTD News. 2 weeks ago, Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping assembled a group of 9 economists and political scientists. They were brought together to discuss Beijing's development strategy for the next 5 years. A week later, Zhen Yongnian, one of the scientists attending the meeting, was revealed to have been investigated by the National University of Singapore over sexual harassment allegations. Zhen was director of the university's East Asian Institute. The university said he since resigned and will depart later this month when his contract expires. It's unknown whether his leave was paid. Several university staff members posted harassment claims against Jin on social media last month. In a Twitter post, a current employee of the East Asian Institute said she'd been sexually harassed by Jin in May 2018 and filed a police report 1 year later. She added that she was bullied by the university after lodging a complaint. Singapore police said they gave Jin a stern warning in April. A spokesman also said the university followed up with an internal investigation into the case. Now we turn to a curious report coming out of Guangxi, an autonomous region in southern China. Local media reported over the weekend that a large number of dead fish appeared along a 2.5-mile stretch of beach. One local official explained that the dead fish began appearing a week ago. They appear to be mainly yellowtail, with a few other species mixed in. The situation is still under investigation, and it's unclear whether the phenomenon was caused by environmental pollution or other biological activities. Local authorities have reportedly collected dead fish and seawater samples for inspection. Some locals have described it as a rare sight. That's as the amount of dead fish is still increasing. Some of them also report seeing dead fish along the beach about a month ago, but on a smaller scale. 2 Australian foreign correspondents were rushed out of China for their safety with the help of Australian consular officials. Their employers said they had been questioned by China's Ministry of State Security.
Very disappointing.
2 top Australian foreign correspondents were rushed out of China Monday night after what's being described as an extraordinary diplomatic standoff. Australia's ABC broadcaster reported both journalists were separately questioned by Chinese authorities. ABC correspondent Bill Birtles, as well as Michael Smith for the Australian Financial Review, had then sought shelter in Australia's embassy in Beijing and consulate in Shanghai. The ABC and AFR reported that diplomats had negotiated with Chinese officials to allow them to leave the country. Birtles and Smith arrived in Sydney on Tuesday morning, and Birtles spoke to reporters on arrival.
It's a relief to be back in a country with genuine rule of law, but this was a whirlwind, and it's not a particularly good experience.
AFR reported both journalists had been banned from leaving China until they answered questions about a woman called Chong Lei. Chong is also an Australian citizen, and she was detained in August. She worked at a Chinese state broadcaster as a television anchor. The correspondents were told they were, quote, persons of interest in an investigation into Chong. Australia still does not know why Chinese authorities have detained her. ABC's Director of News, Gavin Morris, praised Birtles' reporting on China and said when it's safe they will have a correspondent back on the ground in China. This all follows relations that have turned sour between Australia and China this year. Beijing was angry after Australia called for an independent international investigation into the source of the coronavirus pandemic. China then blocked some of the beef it buys from Australia and launched investigations into imports of Australian wine.
India and China accuse each other of firing shots during a new confrontation on their border in the Western Himalayas. Tensions have simmered between the two nations since mid-June. The scuffle left 20 Indian soldiers dead. The Indian Army said in a statement, China's People's Liberation Army, or PLA, attempted to close in on the de facto border Monday night. China, meanwhile, says India breached the informal border. China's foreign ministry said Indian troops had illegally crossed the line of actual control and were the first to fire shots. India denies that and accused the Chinese troops of blatantly violating agreements and firing a few rounds in the air in order to intimidate the Indian side. And exiled Tibetans in a northern hill town of India held special prayers on Monday for the soul of a fallen member. The 53-year-old Tibetan had been part of an Indian Special Forces unit. He was killed in a mine blast last week near the site of a border flare-up with Chinese troops. Amid the world's tense political climate, it's not just Western countries who are standing up against the Chinese Communist Party. Some of the regime's allies are as well. Their attitudes toward Taiwan have now become an indicator of where their loyalties lie.
Pakistan has historically been a close ally to Beijing, but change may be on the horizon. A recent Twitter post from a Pakistan embassy official reveals that the country is looking to develop trade ties with Taiwan. An unusual meeting was held in Egypt last Wednesday. According to Ani News, Sidra Haq, trade and investment attaché at the Embassy of Pakistan in Cairo, met with Michael Ye, the director of the Taiwan Trade Center in Cairo, which serves as Egypt's de facto Taiwanese embassy. They reportedly discussed strengthening Pakistan-Taiwan trade relations. Sidra Haq later posted about the meeting on Twitter, which included a picture with Michael Ye. In her post, she described speaking about trade. She also wrote that it always feels good to connect with other trade wings and compare notes. But she later deleted the post, likely out of fear of Beijing's condemnation. Developing good relationship with Taiwan would mean crossing Beijing's authoritarian regime. The Chinese regime claims Taiwan as part of its territory under the One China policy, but Taiwan, under its own democratic system, fights the designation. Pakistan's choice to seek relations with Taiwan likely angers the CCP due to its formerly close ties to Pakistan. 5 years ago, Beijing signed an almost $50 billion contract with the country. It's the regime's large single overseas investment to date. Andrew Small, author of the China-Pakistan Axis, made it clear that the CCP uses Pakistan as a strategic counterweight to India. The economic support to the CCP offers to Pakistan would also facilitate China's regional competition with India. Current China-India relations are wrought with tension. Just last week, the Indian government announced a ban on another almost 120 Chinese-made mobile apps. With Pakistan showing possible signs it will distance itself from the regime, Beijing seems to be on the verge of losing yet another battle with its neighbors.
Now we turn to the financial sector in China. Our business reporter Paul Graney interviewed financial expert Joseph Trevasani.
Well, it's realistic in a sense that China is the second largest economy in the world, and there will be reasons and occasion to use Chinese-denominated debt. Who is doing it and for what reasons are open to interpretation. I don't really know who's doing it, and it was certainly not illustrated or anything or talked about in the Morgan Stanley piece. But from an overall point of view for the world economy, I'm very doubtful that a country that is an authoritarian country that essentially sets its own rules will be accepted by the world financial community and the world financial economy as a reliable place to deposit your wealth. I just don't see it. In the United States or in Europe, the national bonds, the standards, when you get your money in, get you out, there's completely liquid markets. Everyone knows how to operate. They know the impact of exchanges in the foreign exchange rate. It's been going on for a long time. None of that applies to China. So I have my serious doubts that it will do anything more than creep higher in very specific circumstances.
And how important is building up the yuan as more of a reserve currency? How important is that to the Chinese regime's aspirations for global dominance?
Honestly, I think it's probably more important as a political talking point than it is anything else. I mean, yes, the United States benefits, there's no doubt about it, from having the world's reserve currency. But for China to get in that position, they would have to actually have an open economy the way the United States does, and they do not. And I do not see that type of financial openness occurring underneath the authoritarian government in Beijing. It's just not something that goes with that way of doing government, of doing business.
Joseph, appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.